Coronial Courthouse stands. Please be seated.
I think Ms. Dwyer has one or two more questions.
I think it's hard and I won't be long. Ms. Holland, can I just before Mullen and friends ask you some questions, can I just clarify something about what you told us before the break in terms of the discussion that you had with Mr. Reeve as to why you couldn't go back into the community? What were you actually told by him?
I was told that the community did not want me to go back into the community.
And did he say who in the community?
No, he didn't. And since that time, I have been in touch with members of the community of Yuendamu and been told something very, very different.
Who have you been in touch with in the community of Yuendamu?
Whilst I was working in Yalara, I was notified that there was an elder from Yuendamu in the waiting room who wanted to speak to me. I walked down to the waiting room and she rushed up and gave me the biggest hug. And she said, "Cassie, why don't you come back to Yuendamu? Why don't you come back to us?" And I said, "I was told that the community didn't want me back." And she said, "No," she said, "we all say, Cassie, Cassie, why is Cassie not here? Where is Cassie coming back?" That was a conversation I had at Yalara.
Can you recall the name of that lady?
Her surname is Stewart. I think it's Prudence Stewart.
Okay. How did that make you feel when she told you that she wanted that actually members of the community wanted you back there?
It gave me a bit of healing.
And Miss Holland, when you had that conversation with Mr. Reeve and he told you at that stage that some members of the community or the community didn't want you back into the community, did he offer you an alternative placement?
No, he didn't. He was very harsh.
So what was the solution at that stage? Did you lose your contract?
There was no solution. I didn't lose my contract. There was no discussion as to what was going to come next.
Okay. What was the next step for you in terms of employment?
I was given the opportunity to work at Yalara.
Okay. When did you start work at Yalara?
Within days.
And how long did you stay there in the position?
2 years.
Did you enjoy that position at Yalara?
I did. It's a lovely place to work, but it's not remote work. It's not what I chose to do.
Okay. Yalara is by the national park, connected to Uluru and Resort. Okay.
It's Ayers Rock Resort. I didn't go remote to work in a resort.
I see. So you were in fact looking after a lot of the tourists. Is that right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So you told us that he told you the community didn't want you back. He didn't tell you who it was that had communicated that. Did he tell you why they didn't want you back?
He told me that they blamed me.
I'll just read you something. I'm sorry, Miss Holland. Please continue. I spoke over the top of you.
No, he blamed me. He said they've blamed you.
Did he say anything else about why they blamed you, for example?
Very, very little. Very little.
In a statement that we have from Mr. Reeve at 9-9A, paragraph 159, Mr. Reeve says this: "The elders also conveyed that the community did not want a particular nurse to return, though they did not articulate the exact reason why. I believe there had been some disagreement between this nurse and the community on the day of the withdrawal concerning access to the morgue for the day. However, I was not aware of the specifics of this disagreement." Did you ever come to learn, or was it ever suggested to you that the reason you were not welcomed back was because of that disagreement about access to the morgue?
I was told that by management.
Who in management?
I did not hear that. Dave Reeve.
So Mr. Reeve told you that, is that right?
Yes, he did. Yes.
And did he tell you that at the same time that he told you that you were not going to go back to Yuendamu?
That's correct.
Were you offered the opportunity to explain, in your own words, what had happened?
I explained on numerous occasions how the conversations went.
And if you had been offered the opportunity to go back to the community and explain to the community what had occurred in terms of the clinic staff leaving and to try and resolve that conflict, would you have wanted to do that?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Mr. Mullins.
Thank you, Your Honour. Ms Holland, my name is Mullins. I appear on behalf of the Brown, Walker, Lane and Robertson families. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Do you remember giving an interview to police in around February of 2020?
That's correct.
And you said to the police on that occasion, nurses don't go off on strike.
We don't.
Nurses don't leave patients.
Correct.
It's an absolute rule of thumb.
Correct.
And you said, I'm very old school.
I am.
And
I'm very old.
You'd worked in you'd worked in volatile areas on your own,
Correct.
and you would have been happy to stay in Yuendamu on your own,
Absolutely.
and you would have got some assistance from police if you had a call out.
I would have.
And the fact is that as an old school nurse, you are devoted to your patients,
I am.
and you're an unusual mix in the sense that you have a very high level academic qualifications,
I'm exceptionally qualified.
but you also like to work in the communities as a hands-on nurse.
I absolutely do.
So you like your hands on the tools, despite the fact that
I
you
do.
could... Sorry?
I do. I enjoy emergency medicine. I enjoy first-line retrievals. I enjoy first-line healthcare.
Despite the fact that you could be working in some university somewhere lecturing people.
I've already done that.
In addition to that, though, you have some... do I understand that you've worked with the SES?
Yes, I've worked with the SES and I've also done training with the RFDS.
So you understand the importance of following commands and directions in an emergency.
I absolutely do.
And so in this situation, even though you challenged the original decision that was made for the nurses to be taken out, in that you said you wanted to stay, that's right?
That's correct.
And even though you in fact believed the decision to be wrong, that's correct?
Absolutely.
You followed command.
That's what I'm supposed to do.
Yes.
That's my job.
And so when you were directed to undertake these tasks, such as communicating with people about the funeral,
Yes,
you did what you were told.
I did, and it was a very unpleasant job to be given.
And you had to talk to other people in the community about the
Yes,
fact...
and I received a lot of backlash.
And you received a lot of backlash on the spot.
Totally. All day.
But you didn't say, I'm not going to do this anymore. You continued on with your task.
I did.
And then in reward, your reward was to be told that you couldn't go back to the community.
Absolutely. That is the way it went.
Now, you suggested some other options that were available, and one of them was that management should come out to Yuendamu
Yes.
and they should liaise with the nursing staff,
Yes.
and they
We
should
were given no options. We were given no options on the day.
but they should liaise with police,
Yep.
and they should liaise with the elders and the rest of the community.
It was the management's position to do that.
And there were three... You mean the management position not to do that?
It should have been the management's position to do that.
And there were three people at the Yuendamu clinic who were perfectly placed to assist with access to the elders, being Nola Fisher, Mary Butcher and Jefferson Williams.
That's correct.
Now, can I just clarify a few matters in your evidence briefly? At one stage, again, during the course of your interview with the police, you made this comment, and this is reference to the police. They all knew the culprits, the police knew the culprits, but family moved them around from house to house. And there's a big population in Yuendamu, and they move them from house to house, and that's their safety. And I think you're referring to the people who were allegedly doing these break-ins. Do you recollect that statement?
Yes, I do.
And where did you get that information from?
Julie Frost.
And did you know that before the shooting on 9 November?
We were aware of that.
Now, you also had some interaction with a nurse, Walcott, from Yullamoo. Do you remember that?
I spoke to her. I didn't realise who she was, though. I didn't get a name.
And is it the case that you delivered the keys to her for the Yullamoo station?
Correct. Yes.
And that, again, was what you were directed to do, and that's what you did?
As directed.
Is it the case that she said to you, there's really no point giving me the keys because I've never worked in the Yullamoo clinic, so I don't know where the equipment is? Did she say words of that effect to you?
She certainly did.
And as an experienced nurse, you would have understood that.
I did not wish for this to be done. I did not wish to give her the keys. I did not wish for her to go to Yuendamu.
But in any case, you executed your orders as you were directed to.
As I was directed.
Do you remember having a conversation with a woman by the name of Joyce Brown from Yuendamu at any point in time during the course of the afternoon before you left?
I most certainly probably did.
Do you remember
I don't recall the conversation.
Do you remember her coming around to either the health centre or to the houses and just having a conversation with her about the keys to the morgue?
I had the I don't believe I spoke to her about the keys to the morgue. I spoke to Robertson about it mostly. I may have spoken to other people. We couldn't hand over the keys to the morgue, but we could. They certainly had access to the morgue, and I reiterated that all day.
Do you recollect in any conversation with her talking about the fact that the reason why the nurses were leaving was because of break-ins and the kids need some discipline?
No, didn't say that.
All right. Nothing further. Thank you, Ron.
Mr. Derrick.
Thank you. I'm Mr. Derrick on behalf of NAJA, North Australian Aboriginal Justice Agency.
Sorry, I can barely hear you.
Oh, excuse me. Matthew Derrick from NAJA, North Australian Justice Agency.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. I just have a couple of questions. So, Mr. Mullins has already touched on this a little bit, but with respect to the Aboriginal staff, so Nola, Jabez and Mary, you say in your affidavit at paragraph 32, this makes it incredibly valuable to employ local persons on the staff, something that the clinic does quite well. So you can see a great value in the clinic's Aboriginal staff, is that correct?
Absolutely.
Yep. And would you mind letting the court know precisely why you think there's so much value there? What great function do they provide?
One of the biggest things, they know how to find people. When we're running clinics and we need to find people, they know exactly where people are living.
Yep.
And they work very, very strongly with bringing people into the clinic.
Yep. And so they're vital to ensuring that people get the right health service.
And making sure we have the correct patient.
Okay. Yep. Are there other things that you think they do well or assist greatly for the clinic?
Yes, they broker between the health staff, the Northern Territory health staff, and the community. They are such a strong liaison, and they're our conduit.
And so they really make things smooth for you, for the clinical staff.
Oh, yes.
Just wanted to talk to you now about, or ask a couple of questions about you wanting to stay in the community. At paragraph 56 of your affidavit, you say, Julie Cook suggested she and her partner would like to leave the community the following day. I explained that my preference was to stay in the community. I noted that my unit was located close to the police station and that I hadn't had the same issues with the break-ins. So on that basis, it would seem that at least for the Saturday and up until the time Julie Cook wished to leave, there would have at least been 2 nurses at Yundamu at that stage. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And that's the usual amount of nurses that otherwise would be on call on a Saturday. Would that be right?
That's correct.
Yep. And then otherwise, as it turns out, that's as many nurses that would have or otherwise was required to come across from the Uluru. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Yep. And so, as I understand, and let me know if I'm wrong, there is a policy that says that basically there needs to be at least 2 nurses for call-outs on call. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yep. And then at page 20 of your interview with the police, it states, you note, that Julie didn't have to leave. Then it escalated and then said, if some of you are out, you're all out. All of you have to be out because there's not enough of you to cope with any incident. So that person who's saying, basically, you're all out, who was that person? Who was
Helen Gill.
Okay. And then, so between yourself and Julie then, given that 2 nurses would have been available, it doesn't really make sense that if Julie was available and you were available to stay at least for a day, that could have been correct under policy and logic under the procedures of health.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And so other than, I suppose, Helen's position being illogical, do you have any reason why she suggested no, everyone has to leave?
I believe that order came from above her.
Okay.
She was in a conversation with us, and then we had Fiona Cameron join the conversation, but the one out, all out, I believe, came from Dave Reeve.
Okay. Now, okay. All right. Just going a couple of steps backwards to, I suppose, your first training and when you first came to the Northern Territory, did the Aboriginal Interpreter Service ever provide you training on when it's appropriate to require their services and when it's not necessary or something like that?
No, I'd been in the Territory quite some time before I'd actually had any of that information.
Okay. But was that training ever offered to you?
No,
No. And Health didn't ever suggest this might be something that you could go along to?
no.
Okay. Would you accept that the best practice when there's a person who may require some level of interpreting, best practice would be to go to the AIS for an interpreter?
No, I'm sorry. In community, it's a privacy issue. They would go for family first. They wouldn't go for an external person. That's not the way they are.
Okay. All right. Now, you've obviously quite keen in learning about Warlpiri culture and whatnot and history and things like that. You told
Yes.
the court that you've educated yourself a lot before you came to Yundamu and then when you were there. And that's very positive. Do you think, though, that you would have benefited from Health, say, providing further structured learning on Warlpiri culture and protocols?
No, I think I would have benefited from a better plan of attack on the day.
On the day. What do you mean by that? Do you
On the
mean
day.
Which day are you talking about, sorry?
On the 9th, the fact that we were hauled out of community, with said me being against my wishes, I don't believe any further cultural education would have done anything because I didn't have a leg to stand on that day.
Fair enough on that particular day. But just more generally, do you think it would have been helpful or interesting to have gotten more structured education and training on Warlpiri culture?
We had Warlpiri culture training almost every day. There was always conversations about it. So we're not saying that we didn't understand Warlpiri culture. We had 3 Indigenous workers at our clinic and we learned on the job every day. It didn't have to be a structured sit down.
All right. The final question is, did Health ever provide any training on unconscious bias or anything like that?
I believe I touched more on that in my own studies, more so than in anything structured. I always believe not to bring my own health standards into a community but to accept their health standards and work with the people, not against the people.
Okay, thank you very much for your time. That's all my questions.
Thank you.
Your Honour, I have no questions for this witness.
I just have some brief questions.
Sure.
Ms Holland, my name's Luke Officer and I act for Constable Rolfe. I'm just going to ask you a few questions based on your statement that you gave to police. Your first statement dated 12 February 2020. At page 28, I just want to read what you said to the police officers.
I'm having difficulty hearing you. I'm sorry. You're right out of focus. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Would you like me to repeat what I had said?
Yes, please.
So my name is Luke Officer. I act for Constable Rolfe. I'm just going to ask you some questions. And firstly, starting with your statement that you gave police on 12 February 2020. At page 28 of that statement, you say this: I do know quite a bit about what was going prior to the shooting. I had an incident of a conversation with the senior sergeant out there, and I could see her level of fear and frustration regarding this individual. We had a conversation on that day, and she told me how scared she was of him. I have met him only once during an issue with another patient, and he stood out from the crowd. And this person I did not appreciate being, reading in the papers that he was a 19-year-old teenager. He was a man, and he was a very scary man, and I recognised him as someone in the crowd that I wouldn't want to tangle with. Do you remember giving that answer or that statement to police?
I did. And at the time, it's an inappropriate thing to say, particularly in hindsight. I do know Kumanjayi Walker. I have met Kumanjayi Walker. And at the time of my meeting Kumanjayi Walker, I was very on guard, and I did have concerns for my safety being in the same room.
I just want to ask you some questions. I'm not being critical. Firstly, that particular passage I read out, just to be clear, that relates to when you say the individual, Kumanjayi Walker.
That's correct.
And the conversations you had with Senior Sergeant that gave you the impression that you could see her level of fear and frustration, and she told you how scared she was of him, what precisely were the words that she used to you during that conversation?
I don't know whether she particularly said she was scared of him, but she was frustrated about the fact that her community that she looked after was in disarray because of one individual.
And when you say that she was frustrated that the community was in disarray, did she elaborate on that?
She just showed me the frustration about the fact that it had then escalated to the fact that the nurses were leaving.
During that conversation, I withdraw that. When did you have a conversation about the axe incident that had happened in the days earlier?
That was whilst I was in the ambulance, moving the ambulance and my vehicle into the police compound.
Was that the same time you were having this conversation, the passage I just read out to you?
That is correct.
And so the case was that Senior Sergeant Frost was expressing frustration about the disarray in the community because of that one individual being Kumanjayi Walker. That's your evidence?
That is correct.
And did she express to you in any terms as to what she anticipated could be achieved to prevent that from happening?
No, she didn't elaborate on police work.
You talk about the occasion that you'd only met him once, and I think your words before were you were very on guard. Why was that?
He was very jumpy.
And was that
He didn't sit still.
Sorry.
He was leaning into my personal space. He was very close to me at particular times. He didn't sit on the chair. He was very, very close to me the whole time, and I felt that my personal space was violated.
Was that the instance you gave evidence to Councillor Sisting earlier when he'd come in after breaking into Waidak looking for food?
That is correct. He
And
was
you-
very jumpy.
And you gave evidence that he came in under a different name.
Yes, he did, because when I look back at the name wasn't the same.
What name was it?
I don't recall.
Is that something you're familiar with patients coming in giving false names?
Never.
And you went on to say that he was encouraged to use another name. Who was encouraging him to do that?
He was introduced to me by the White Act worker, and she didn't give an explanation as to his injuries until during the consult, and she was protecting him.
What do you mean protecting him?
He'd broken into the White Act area where there was food supplies, and he was going through looking for food. He was very hungry and he was very driven for food, and he wanted food, and she stood in his way, and he was injured, and she wasn't injured, but he was injured, and basically she'd said that, you know, he'd got the food he needed, but now he needed to have care of his wounds. But she did say specifically that he'd broken in, all he wanted was food, and that's what she kept saying. And when he was in the department with me, all he wanted was food. He was very focused on, I think there was a piece of food on the bench, and he was really focused on getting to it.
So it was a situation, and in your words, not something you're familiar with, where this individual, Kumanjayi Walker, had committed an offence, had come in under the pretences of a false name, and the person he was with was encouraging him to use that false name in order to protect him from what really happened. Is that the situation?
Yes, and I don't believe he gave me his name.
And so in this conversation with Sergeant Frost, where she's talking about the community being in disarray, did she express to you any efforts she had made with members of the community or elders to try and curtail that at all?
She told me that there was an ongoing action by the police to apprehend Kumanjayi Walker, and that they had attempted to do that, and it didn't end well after Kumanjayi got scared and ran at the police.
Was that when he charged the police with an axe? Is that the incident?
Yes, he was cornered and he was scared.
Did she express, though, my question was, any endeavours she had made with members of the community or the elders to try and curtail Kumanjayi Walker's...
No, that wasn't entered into.
Not in the conversation?
Not in that very brief conversation.
In your statement at page 14, and this, just to give you some context, is where there's some discussions about the withdrawal of the nursing staff. You say, and it's the last paragraph of that page, and I'm reading from halfway through it, this is part of cultural safety. This is about discussing with the elders the departure. Ideally, you would sit down and have a meeting with them. This had escalated past the level of, we are going to sit down and talk to you, because that had failed over the previous weeks. This had been going on, this had been building up for weeks. The whole time I've been at Yuendamu since July, there's been break-ins, constant break-ins, and frequently targeted at the health houses, not other houses. Other things have been happening, shops being broken into, and it was just a constant feeling of break-ins and being unsafe. And again, I've never seen nurses' houses targeted anywhere else. I've never seen it. Is it the case that when you say this had gone past the level of sitting down and talk to you because it had failed, that even the members of the community and the elders had come to a standstill in being able to control the break-ins?
I believe that to be true. I believe they felt powerless, because when I spoke to the elders about the nurses, particularly in the emergency department when I was dealing with the elders first up, one of the male elders said to me, "This no good, we've got to keep nurses safe." That was his comment.
Was it ever expressed to you, or withdraw that, were you ever told that Kumanjayi Walker was being hidden by members of the community?
I believe I was told that he was moved around. He was difficult to find.
Who told you that?
Julie Frost,
And when did she tell you that?
in the vehicle.
At the same time of the conversation on 9 November 2019 that I read to you earlier on. Was it ever indicated to you, or were you ever told that police had formed a view that he was the leader in organising the property or the break-ins on nurses' quarters, nurses' clinic?
No, I don't believe he was ever labelled as a leader, but we did get the impression that there were children and an older person that were doing the break-ins.
So would it be safe to say, or tell me whether you agree or disagree with this proposition, that you're having this conversation with the senior sergeant at Yuendamu, who, in your words, has a very high level of fear and frustration, and she was scared of him, that the community was in disarray, and that you're shaking your head, you disagree with?
I don't believe that she was scared. I believe she was frustrated, as any police officer would be trying to look after a community.
Well, Ms Holland, you say we had a conversation on that day and she told me how scared she was of him.
She certainly, she may have said that, and if I've written that in the statement, then that's what she said.
So tell me whether you agree or disagree with this. You're having this conversation with the senior sergeant at Yuendamu, sorry, sergeant, or her words senior sergeant, but Sergeant Frost, who's expressing a level of fear and frustration, and in your words, a potential fear or scare of him. Her words, you say in evidence that the community was in disarray because of this individual. You yourself are experiencing, as you mentioned in your statement, that had gone past the point of trying to have elders or members of the community involved and they were powerless. On reflection, does that not cause you great concern for not only you but also the safety of the other nurses within the community at Yuendamu at the time?
It certainly does, because if you've got a community in disarray, you don't know that you're going to be protected. And going back to what I said about Sergeant Frost, she had just been relaying to me the incident when she'd had an axe thrown at her. If I'd had an axe thrown at me, I'd be scared.
Any other questions? Yes. May it please Your Honour. Good afternoon, Ms Holland. My name is Amanda Bernard and I act for the Northern Territory Police Force. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Ms Holland, I would like to ask you, please, if I may, a little bit more about the work that you are doing in the clinic. Talk us through, if you would, the sort of injuries and illnesses or health problems that community members would present with in Yuendamu.
I've always chosen to work on call. I love working on call. I deal with medical emergencies, heart attacks, respiratory problems, extremely ill children. I've worked on children who have been near death. I've worked on adults who have been near death. I work very well with surgical emergencies. I've worked with stabbings. I've worked with severe limb trauma. There's not much that I haven't worked with in either a remote area or in a major hospital.
All right, I'd like to keep it to Yuendamu specifically, if I could. You talked about stabbings. Have you been exposed to stabbings or stab wounds during the period that you were in Yuendamu?
Not in Yuendamu, no, but previously I have been.
Okay, what about other emergency presentations caused by injuries or assaults?
I've dealt with a lot of spearings in the Cape, and I've dealt with a very wide range of big lacerations, things that we have to put back together again.
What about in Yuendamu specifically, though?
We've had a lot of very, very ill children out there. We've had a lot of renal dialysis patients get extremely ill. There were more medical emergencies at Yuendamu rather than surgical emergencies.
Okay. You spoke in your evidence this morning about your fears for your safety while you were living and working in Yuendamu. And you've given some evidence, firstly, about what you were told by Luana, that the community was dangerous. You told us that this morning. You've also given some evidence about your concerns about dogs. And Mr. Officer just asked you some questions based on your interview with police where you talked about constant break-ins. Was there anything else that you saw or was part of in Yuendamu that gave rise to your fears for your safety at that time?
I did hear what you said, but I'm having a little bit of trouble because the microphone's not directed at you. There was a general feeling of unrest in community. It was an extremely loud community. We often heard raised voices. We heard a lot of barking. It was not a quiet community.
All right. What about violence? Did you view or perceive any violence?
I didn't see violence per se, but we had a lot of injuries that came in.
What sort of injuries came in due to violence, Miss Holland?
Broken arms, lacerations, cuts, fractures,
And these were injuries that you were treating while you were nursing
Yes.
in Uendamu?
Yes.
I want to ask you now about this issue with the keys to the ambulance.
Yes.
When you left Uendamu, you left one of the Uendamu Clinic's ambulances in the police station compound, is that right?
That's correct.
And you left your own personal vehicle there as well, as I understand it?
That's correct.
What was the reason for that? Was there a concern that those vehicles would be damaged or something of that nature?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I was instructed to drive the ambulance out of community, so I needed to lock up my vehicle, and I didn't want to leave it where it would get harmed.
When you say that, you mean you're instructed to drive the second ambulance out of community
That's correct.
to Uluru?
To Alice Springs.
Oh, okay. So you offered the ambulance keys to Sergeant Frost, but she declined them, is that right?
Yes, and that was going against orders, but I was worried. I was really worried leaving the community without an ambulance. It really
Okay.
worried me.
To be very, very clear, you offered her the ambulance keys, certainly not the clinic keys.
Certainly not the clinic keys.
Okay. Can I suggest something to you? If you had given Sergeant Frost the ambulance keys and then the police weren't there whenever it was that the nurses returned, the nurses wouldn't have been able to collect the ambulance keys, or may not have been able to for some time. Would you agree with that?
No, there would have been officers there that been able to get to the ambulance. There were extra keys to the ambulance. There were spare keys.
If you gave the ambulance keys to Julie Frost, though, and they were stored inside the police station, and then the Uendamu members were called out to Nirrupi for a few hours, there would have been a delay in returning those keys to you, wouldn't there?
There would be.
The keys to the clinic itself, you took those to Uluru,
Yes, I did.
and you gave them, as we've heard, to Lorraine Walcott.
Yes,
You were instructed to do that as part of your by your management, is that right?
that's correct.
That was just part of your handover.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Ms. Holland. Those are the matters, Your Honour.
Yes. Any other questions?
Just briefly arising, if I'm
Sorry, just one.
Sure.
Ms. Holland, you have described for the court a conversation that you had with Lorraine Walcott in Ualamu. Were you familiar with the second nurse in Ualamu?
I didn't know either of the nurses.
Okay. You weren't aware, for example, that her name was Heather Zanker. You weren't aware that she had been previously a nurse in Uendamu for many years prior to this occasion?
No.
Thank you.
Yes, Ms. Boyd.
just briefly arising from the Ms. Holland, counsel for Constable Rolfe put to you a number of things. I'm just going to clarify some issues with you to see if you're aware of it. In page 31 of your interview with police, and this is the interview that you do in February 2020, so a couple of months after Kumanjayi passed away, you say this, and you were asked about the conversation with Julie Frost as you were delivering the ambulance to the compound. You said, Julie jumped in the ambulance with me as I was driving it through the compound so she could show me where to park it. And she told me of an incident, of rioting and unrest that was going on, and she agreed that, yes, we're not safe. And she spoke of an incident where the person, the accused, Kumanjayi Walker, they went to apprehend him. I'm assuming it was Julie and another member of staff went to apprehend him. He turned around, he threw an axe, a large implement at them while they were attempting to apprehend him. They threw something at him, the axe. They fled and they actually had their guns upholstered. She told me they had their guns upholstered. She came inches away from being killed. That's what you relayed to the police in February 2020.
And that's what Julie told me.
When you were relaying that information, do you accept that you might have been agitated when you were telling the police about this?
Julie was agitated in the fact that she said that she had unholstered her gun.
All right. Can I ask you to accept from me, Ms. Holland, that in fact Julie was not involved at all on that incident on the 6th of November? Chris Hand and another officer, Lanyon Smith, went to arrest Kumanjayi on the 6th of November, and Kumanjayi on that occasion had access to an axe, and people can interpret what happened after that, but he ran outside and dropped the axe. Julie was definitely upset by it. She's given evidence about it. But do you accept that you do not have accurate information about what occurred during the course of that incident on the 6th of November?
Well, if what you're saying is true, then that is inaccurate evidence.
Okay. Do you accept from me that that's an instance where you've taken some information that was given by Sergeant Frost, and when you've come to relay it months later, it has been exaggerated to some extent?
It has been altered, but that's what my memory had told me.
Okay. I just want to ask you about one other issue, which is that in your interview at page 15, you say, the whole time I've been at Yundamu since July, there's been break-ins, constant break-ins, and frequently targeted at the health houses, not other houses. I'm not being critical of you, but do you accept, thinking back on that what you said there is an exaggeration of what was occurring?
It was a conversation that we had constantly. Just about every meeting started with some form of break-ins. We didn't start the meeting on good notes out there. It was a constant discussion about security. It was a constant discussion about the risks of being broken into and about our safety. It was an interesting place to be, but it was certainly a lot about our safety. That was frequently how the meetings were started.
And that was different to what you had experienced in other communities, is that right?
Absolutely.
Nothing further, thank you.
Ms. Holland, thank you for patiently listening to and carefully answering the questions of all the various counsel today. We appreciate you coming and giving your evidence about this difficult topic.
Thank you, Your Honour.
We can adjourn to the